Paddle break-in is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but do paddle characteristics actually change during break-in, or do we simply perceive a difference in feel because we're just getting used to playing with the new paddle? I've been maining the Joola Pro 5 for about 6 months now. I've taken data when the paddle was new, after 200 games, and after 350 games. We'll take a look at the data today and see exactly what happens during break-in. Let's take a look at these 3 plots. This is the response plot when the paddle was new. This is after 200 games. And finally, this is after 350 games. We can see the response plots are definitely different as we play with the paddle. This means that paddle characteristics are indeed changing. Let's take a closer look at what's exactly changing and how it may affect feel. Let's start by looking at the first mode. From 0 to 200 games, the frequency decreased from 361 Hz to 353 Hz. Stiffness is a function of fundamental frequency and paddle weight. Since the paddle weight didn't change through this testing, this means that stiffness decreased by 4.3%. From 200 games to 350 games, we again see the fundamental frequency decreasing from 353 Hz to 318 Hz. This represents a 19% decrease in stiffness. After a total of 350 games with the paddle, the overall stiffness dropped by 22%. This is the reason why the paddle feels softer. On court, I noticed the softer feel the most when hitting topspin drops and dinks. Topspin drops have become easier to control as the paddle has gotten softer. I feel like the ball is sitting on the face longer during contact. And because I feel like I can hold on to the ball longer, it feels like I have better control of depth because I have a better sense of the amount of spin I'm putting on the ball. Dinks have always felt good since the paddle was new. But as the paddle has gotten softer, again, I feel like I have more control in the same way I do for topspin drops. I feel like the ball is sitting on the face longer, giving me a better sense of control over the depth and spin I'm putting on the ball. Looking at the changes in the second mode, we also see the frequency dropping throughout playing with the paddle. This change also aligns with the stiffness decrease we saw on the first fundamental mode. But notice here how the second mode peak is actually getting higher the more games that are played. We've talked about peak ratio before, taking the height of the second peak compared to the height of the first peak. When the paddle was new, the ratio was 0.57. After 200 games, the peak ratio increased to 0.64. And finally, at 350 games, we increased again to 0.7. This results in the paddle feeling more poppy and springy. Now, I'm not saying the Pro 5 has turned into a poppy or power paddle. It's just now when I hit the ball, I can sense a little bit more pop in the feel. I noticed the increased pop the most at the kitchen. When the paddle was new, I felt like sometimes the put-away power was a little lacking at the net, and for volleys and counters, I felt like the ball was coming off the face a little slower than I wanted. Now, after the paddle was broken in, especially past 200 games, I felt more confident in the pop that the paddle was delivering, and I didn't have to force the ball as much to generate the same amount of power. Now from the last video, we saw how the coverage between the first and second peaks shows how dense versus hollow a paddle feels. Again, this is calculated by drawing a line between the peaks and calculating the area under this line that is filled. Let's take a look and see if coverage has changed during the Pro 5's break-in. After 200 games, we see essentially no change to coverage. The amount of filled area remains the same. From 200 to 350 games though, we see coverage decrease by 9%. This means the paddle feels more hollow compared to when it was new. Again, I'm not saying the Pro 5 has turned into a completely hollow paddle. It's still very much a dense paddle, but now it just feels a little more hollow compared to when it was new. The increase in hollow feel for me has had a negative impact while playing with the paddle. Resets have become slightly more difficult to control. It feels like the ball isn't coming off the face in the same linear way as it used to. I found that I need to put a lot more focus on the paddle angle and pace when resetting a ball. I think this is more of a personal preference. I found that I struggle playing with paddles that feel hollow. One of the more interesting things we can see from the data is the rate of change of each metric. We see that stiffness change is actually non-linear. From 0 to 200 games, stiffness decreases by only 4%, whereas from 200 to 350 games, we see stiffness decrease by 19%. This means that when you first start playing with the paddle, stiffness doesn't really change that much. But as you play more, the paddle becomes softer much more quickly. Peak ratio change is linear. The paddle gets poppier and more springy at a consistent rate as you play. Coverage change is also nonlinear. From 0 to 200 games, coverage basically remains unchanged. The paddle has the same dense feel. But from 200 to 350 games, coverage decreases by 9% and the paddle starts to feel more hollow. Putting all these metrics together, when you first start playing with the paddle, you feel it getting poppier at first. Some may perceive this as an increase in power. Slowly, you notice the paddle starts getting a little softer, but with the same dense feel. As you play more, the paddle is still getting poppier, but you notice the paddle is getting noticeably more softer because the rate of change for stiffness is higher than when you first started playing. As you feel the paddle getting softer, you also notice the paddle starting to feel slightly more hollow. Before having this data, I never knew what to think of break-in. I've heard people say there were big changes to feel, but others say that there wasn't. Some people said the paddle gets softer, while other people said it gets poppier or more powerful. After taking this data, it's apparent that break-in is a real thing that happens to paddles, that affects the characteristics of the paddle itself and the way it feels. But it was more interesting to see all the different characteristics changing at different times by different amounts. Now this data and these trends probably apply to other Gen 3 paddles as well, but I'm curious to see if the same trends hold for foam paddles. If you'd like to see that data, leave a comment and make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.